What if a middle school kid could build a chat system for his entire family before most people even had internet at home? That kid was Mark Zuckerberg, and his journey from childhood coder to global tech mogul began long before he set foot in a Harvard dorm room. He was not born into fame or fortune, but into a home where learning and curiosity were part of everyday life. Mark Elliott Zuckerberg was born in 1984 in White Plains, New York, and raised in the quiet suburban town of Dobbs Ferry. His father, Edward Zuckerberg, was a dentist who ran a clinic attached to their home, and his mother, Karen, was a psychiatrist before becoming a full-time mom to Mark and his three sisters. In many ways, their home was filled with books, computers, conversation, and constant encouragement. Even at a very young age, Mark wasn't just playing games on the computer. He was trying to understand how they worked. While many kids his age were glued to television, he was drawn to screens in a different way. He asked questions. He clicked every button. He read every manual. By the time he was 10 years old, it was clear to everyone around him Mark wasn't just smart. He was uniquely focused. His father noticed his son's growing passion for computers and hired a private tutor to help guide him beyond what the average school could offer. Every week, a software developer named David Newman came to the house to work with Mark. According to Newman, teaching Mark was like trying to keep up with a tornado. The boy devoured information. He would finish assignments faster than expected, and then ask for more complex problems to solve. Mark loved puzzles, logic games, and anything that challenged his brain to think in new ways. This wasn't just a passing phase. At age 12, he built his first real software project, a messaging system he named ZuckNet. The program allowed computers in the house and his father's dental office to communicate. It was basically an early version of what we now call instant messaging, and it worked perfectly. His father used it to communicate with the front desk staff without yelling across rooms. While other kids were just learning how to type, Mark had built a working network for practical use. He was creating solutions, not just experimenting. His family was supportive but not overly impressed. To them, it was just Mark being Mark. He wasn't doing it for attention or praise. He was doing it because he loved the process. Later, during his teenage years at Ardsley High School and then at the prestigious Phillips Exeter Academy, Mark continued to stand out. He excelled in mathematics, science, and literature, but computers remained his true obsession. At Exeter, he developed a music player called Synapse that used artificial intelligence to learn the user's preferences and recommend songs. This was years before music apps like Spotify existed. The software impressed enough people that major tech companies like Microsoft and AOL offered to buy it and offered Mark a job. He turned them all down. He wasn't interested in going corporate at 16. He wanted to keep learning. Instead of cashing out early, Mark used the attention and experience to deepen his interest in software and human behavior. In his free time, he read philosophy and classics. He was particularly fascinated by questions about identity, community, and how people connect with one another. While his peers were planning for graduation parties, Mark was deep in conversations about ethics and technology. He loved literature and coding equally, an unusual combination that would later become a major strength. His talent for understanding how people think and how machines work gave him an almost unfair advantage. It wasn't just about writing lines of code. It was about designing systems that people would want to use intuitively and repeatedly. Mark also had a competitive side. He took fencing seriously and became the captain of his school's team. This discipline taught him focus, strategy, and how to win not just with speed, but with precision. All these elements, intellectual curiosity, emotional insight, technical skill, and competitive drive, were already part of him before he ever went to college. And he wasn't just skilled, he was fast. One teacher once said that Mark could finish a week's worth of work in a day. But even with all this talent, he remained low-key. He didn't boast. He didn't chase popularity. What he chased were ideas. He carried notebooks filled with sketches of software interfaces, logic models, and thoughts about human connection. One classmate remembered that Mark could sit quietly for hours, completely absorbed in coding, barely noticing the time. In many ways, the world outside faded when he was building something. He didn't need loud music or applause, just a keyboard and a problem to solve. That internal engine, the one that kept running even when no one was watching, was the true source of his future success. While most teenagers were still exploring what they might enjoy, Mark had already found his passion. And more than that, he had already created things that others found useful. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a shortcut. It was hours and hours of quiet dedication. At a time when computers were still intimidating to many, Mark made them feel like play. He wasn't trying to change the world, not yet. But he was training for it, one line of code at a time. The seeds of something much bigger had already been planted. Because when you look back at those years, what stands out is not a single invention, but a pattern. A pattern of building, refining, learning, and building again. He didn't wait for school assignments to tell him what to do. He made his own challenges. He saw every piece of software not just as a task, but as a question. Could this be better? Could this be smarter? Could this connect more people? And as we now know, those questions would lead to one of the most revolutionary platforms in modern history. But before Facebook, before Silicon Valley, before billions of users and global influence, there was just a boy in his room. Curious, focused, relentless, and that's where the story truly begins. When Mark Zuckerberg stepped onto the campus of Harvard University, he wasn't thinking about building a tech empire. He was thinking about ideas, about questions, and about people. He had chosen to study computer science and psychology, a combination that many found unusual, but for Mark, it made perfect sense. He wasn't just interested in how machines worked, but in how people made decisions, formed relationships, and shared information. This dual focus would become one of the most important foundations of what was to come. Harvard was a place filled with ambition, intelligence, and legacy. Mark wasn't intimidated. If anything, he felt energized. He quickly became known in tech circles on campus. He helped friends with coding projects, shared advice freely, and continued building small software programs just for fun. But one program, created late at night in his dorm room, would change everything. It was called FaceMash. The idea was simple, maybe too simple. It allowed users to compare two student photos side by side and vote on who was more attractive. To create the site, Mark hacked into Harvard's internal databases to collect student ID photos. The site went live, and within hours, it spread like wildfire across the campus. Students were fascinated, amused, and outraged. The traffic overwhelmed Harvard's servers, and soon the school administration took notice. FaceMash was shut down in less than 2 days. Mark was brought before the university's disciplinary board for violating privacy rules. He wasn't expelled, but he came close. While the project may have been reckless, it revealed something important. People were hungry for a way to interact, to see each other, to connect online. Mark saw the reaction, he saw the chaos, and more importantly, he saw the potential. It wasn't the rating game that mattered. It was the attention it received, the engagement, the conversations it sparked. Something was missing at Harvard, and maybe beyond. Students wanted a way to represent themselves online, to share who they were, and to know a little more about the people around them. In his dorm room in Kirkland House, Mark began working on a new idea. It was more thoughtful, more useful, and far more ambitious. The concept was simple, an online directory for Harvard students. A profile page with a photo, basic details, maybe some interests, and a way to connect. He started coding immediately. He reached out to friends for help, people like Eduardo Saverin, who would become one of Facebook's co-founders. They discussed how it should look, how it would work, and how they might roll it out. Mark called it the Facebook. They launched the site in early 2004. At first, it was only available to Harvard students. You needed a Harvard email address to sign up, but the impact was immediate. Within 24 hours, hundreds of students had joined. In a few days, that number grew to over 1,000. People loved it. They updated their profiles, checked out classmates' pages, and began sending friend requests. The experience was new but felt instantly natural. It wasn't just about information, it was about identity. The Facebook offered a place for people to be seen, to share, and to belong. Mark and his team watched in real time as the numbers grew. The excitement was contagious. Soon, students from other Ivy League schools began asking to join. Mark realized that this wasn't just a Harvard thing, it was a human thing. People wanted connection. They wanted digital versions of their real social lives. The Facebook was giving them exactly that and more. Mark didn't sleep much during those weeks. He coded all night, responded to feedback, fixed bugs, and imagined what might come next. Meanwhile, his roommates and early collaborators, including Dustin Moskovitz and Chris Hughes, worked alongside him. What started as a fun project had quickly become a full-time obsession. But it wasn't just about the technical challenge. It was about the response. For the first time, Mark saw his work affecting real people in real ways. Conversations were happening because of his software. New friendships were forming. social groups were shifting. It was no longer just code, it was culture. As more schools joined the platform, the team realized they needed to scale. That meant more servers, more structure, and eventually more funding. But the core idea remained the same, giving people a place to connect, reflect, and express themselves. Mark wasn't aiming to build a company. Not yet. He was still in college, still attending classes, still wearing hoodies and eating late-night pizza. But something had begun. Something bigger than he could have planned, yet something he had been preparing for all his life. A platform was born not out of a corporate vision, but from a college dorm built by someone who just wanted to solve a problem. And as the user numbers climbed, Mark began asking himself a new question. If this is what's possible in a few weeks, what could we build in a few years? As Facebook began spreading through Harvard and beyond, something became clear to Mark Zuckerberg and his small team. They were no longer just managing a student project. They were building something people truly needed. It started with other Ivy League schools. Soon after Harvard, the Facebook opened to students at Yale, Columbia, and Stanford. Each time a new school was added, the excitement grew. The format was simple: profiles, photos, friend requests, and status updates. But the emotional pull was powerful. Students used it not just to keep in touch, but to understand who their peers were. It was a digital map of the social landscape, updated in real time. As demand grew, Mark realized Harvard could no longer contain what they had built. The idea had grown too large, too fast. By the summer of 2004, just a few months after launching, Mark made a major decision. He would leave Harvard and move to Palo Alto, California. To some, it was a risky move. He had been offered lucrative job offers before and turned them down. Now, he was walking away from one of the world's most prestigious universities to chase a vision. But Mark was never one to follow the safe path. He rented a small house in Palo Alto and filled it with laptops, whiteboards, and a few trusted friends. This house became the unofficial headquarters of Facebook. There was no polished furniture or big office, just a living room filled with people working late, arguing over design choices, and writing thousands of lines of code. Among the roommates and early employees was Dustin Moskovitz, who focused on business operations and back-end development. Chris Hughes worked on user outreach and product development. And Eduardo Saverin, one of the original co-founders, was still trying to manage the company's finances and early deals from New York. But as the company began to attract attention, tensions started to rise. Mark had his eyes set on growth, fast, strategic, and bold. He wanted to scale the platform and improve its features quickly, which required capital and expert guidance. In California, he began networking with venture capitalists, entrepreneurs, and experienced founders. That's when he met Peter Thiel, one of the co-founders of PayPal. Thiel saw potential in Mark's focus and offered a $500,000 investment in exchange for a stake in the company. This funding gave Facebook its first real boost. It allowed them to hire more engineers, buy better servers, and start thinking like a real startup. But success also attracted scrutiny. In the midst of Facebook's rapid rise, 3 Harvard classmates, Cameron Winklevoss, Tyler Winklevoss, and Divya Narendra, filed a lawsuit. They claimed that Mark had stolen their idea. According to them, they had asked him to build a site called Harvard Connection, and instead he launched Facebook. The legal battle was messy, with emails, timelines, and public statements fueling speculation. Mark never admitted wrongdoing, but the case was eventually settled. The Winklevoss twins received a multi-million-dollar agreement. The lawsuit didn't stop Facebook's momentum. By the end of 2004, the platform had reached over 1 million users. What made Facebook different was its exclusivity and structure. Unlike MySpace, which was chaotic and open to all, Facebook was clean, organized, and limited to college students. You needed a valid college email to join, and that made it feel like a private club. This strategy worked perfectly. Students trusted the platform, updated their profiles, shared photos, and made connections. The interface was easy to use, but what kept users coming back was the sense of presence. You could see when someone updated their status or uploaded a new photo. It created a digital heartbeat, always pulsing, always alive. Mark and his team kept innovating. They introduced features like the wall, where friends could leave public messages. They improved the messaging system, allowing private chats. Every update was aimed at making the platform feel more human, more responsive, more essential. Behind the scenes, the work was intense. The company grew rapidly, moving into a real office space, hiring full-time staff and creating departments. But the energy of the original house in Palo Alto never faded. Mark kept his signature hoodie and casual attitude. He avoided flashy press appearances and focused on product development. He still did much of the coding himself, especially on major features. His leadership style was unconventional. He valued speed, clarity, and obsession with the user experience. If something wasn't perfect, it wasn't good enough. But Mark also had a motto that defined Facebook's early years: move fast and break things. He believed that experimentation and risk were essential for innovation. If they waited until everything was safe, they'd never grow. This mindset led to quick iterations, bold launches, and sometimes public backlash. But it also kept the platform ahead of its competitors. As more schools joined, then high schools, then international universities, Facebook evolved. It was no longer just a college network. It was becoming a global phenomenon. And yet Mark remained focused. He didn't care about being a celebrity, he cared about the product. He once said that if he didn't build Facebook, someone else would have. But that wasn't entirely true. Others may have had the idea, but Mark had the discipline, the vision, and the stamina to execute. The platform was growing faster than anyone had expected. But deep down, Mark knew this was still just the beginning. By the time Facebook had millions of users, the world was starting to pay serious attention. What had begun in a dorm room was now a full-fledged tech company, expanding rapidly across countries, age groups, and industries. But with growth came challenges, strategic decisions, leadership pressure, and the question of what kind of company Facebook would ultimately become. Mark Zuckerberg was still in his early 20s, yet he was now CEO of one of the fastest-growing platforms in internet history. The stakes were getting higher, and every move mattered. By 2006, Facebook was no longer limited to just college students. The company opened registration to anyone over the age of 13 with a valid email address. This decision was met with excitement and concern. On one hand, it meant unprecedented growth, opening the doors to the world. On the other hand, it meant redefining the culture of the platform. How would it stay relevant, safe, and engaging for such a broad audience? Mark believed that inclusivity was the future. If Facebook was about connecting people, then it had to include everyone. This expansion brought millions of new users, but it also created technical and ethical challenges. The team had to rethink design, infrastructure, and community guidelines. And during this critical period, Facebook launched one of its most important and controversial features: the news feed. Before the news feed, users had to visit individual profiles to see updates. Now, for the first time, users could scroll through a dynamic stream of content. Statuses, photos, new friendships, all in one place. It was revolutionary, but it was also invasive. The moment it launched, users reacted with outrage. People felt their privacy had been violated. Their lives were suddenly on display, updated in real time. Protests spread across the site, and thousands joined Facebook groups demanding the feature be removed. Mark didn't panic. He didn't back down. Instead, he wrote an open letter to the community. He acknowledged the concerns and quickly implemented privacy controls, giving users more choice over what appeared in their feed. But he didn't remove the feature. He believed news feed was the future of social interaction online, and he was right. Today, it's the foundation of how we experience social media. It showed Mark's ability to listen, adapt, but also stand firm when he believed in a product's potential. Around the same time, Facebook began exploring advertising. Not the flashy banners used by other websites, but personalized, targeted ads based on user behavior. It was a delicate balance, using data to serve businesses without losing the trust of users. Mark knew that if Facebook was to survive, it had to be profitable. But he also understood that people wouldn't stay on a platform they didn't trust. So the company developed new tools and policies, constantly adjusting their approach to data. In 2007, Facebook launched the Facebook platform, an ecosystem where third-party developers could build apps that integrated directly with the site. This led to the creation of thousands of mini-programs, games, quizzes, and tools inside Facebook. It turned the social network into a digital playground. One of the most famous apps to emerge from this period was Farmville, a game where users could build virtual farms, share progress with friends, and spend real money on upgrades. It exploded in popularity and showed how powerful Facebook's network had become. Mark understood that Facebook wasn't just a product, it was a platform. A space where users, developers, brands, and communities all played different roles. and he was learning to manage all those roles at once. During this period, he also began building a leadership team. One of the most important hires was Sheryl Sandberg, who joined Facebook in 2008 as Chief Operating Officer. She brought years of experience from Google and helped turn Facebook into a revenue-generating machine. With Sandberg's expertise, the company scaled its business operations, advertising strategy, and global reach. Mark remained the visionary. Sheryl became the strategist. Their partnership helped Facebook prepare for its next phase, not just surviving but dominating. But even as the company matured, Mark kept a startup mentality. He encouraged engineers to test new ideas quickly. He held hackathons, all-night coding sessions designed to spark innovation. Some of Facebook's best features were born from these events. The company's internal culture was fast, focused, and ambitious. They celebrated big wins and learned from failures. Mark still reviewed code, participated in product meetings, and kept a close eye on the user experience. He wasn't just a figurehead, he was deeply involved in the day-to-day work. As Facebook's influence grew, so did the scrutiny. Privacy advocates, regulators, and journalists began asking tougher questions. How was data being used? Could the platform influence elections? What responsibility did Facebook have for the content it allowed? Mark didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew the questions wouldn't go away. He began preparing for the long game, building teams to focus on trust, safety, and policy. But despite the controversies, users kept coming. By 2010, Facebook had surpassed 500 million users. It was one of the most visited websites on Earth, and it had become a new kind of global community. People used it to plan weddings, find lost relatives, organize protests, and reconnect with old friends. It was a mirror of human life, messy, complex, emotional, and ever-changing. And through it all, Mark Zuckerberg remained calm, analytical, and relentless. He was no longer a college dropout with an idea. He was now a tech leader, navigating one of the most powerful platforms ever created. And the world was watching what he would do next. By the early 2010s, Facebook was no longer just a popular website. It was a central part of people's lives around the world. For hundreds of millions, it was the first thing they checked in the morning and the last thing they scrolled through at night. From birthdays to global news, from family updates to political debates, everything was happening on Facebook. And Mark Zuckerberg, still in his 20s, was at the helm of this cultural and technological shift. The platform's power was undeniable. So was the responsibility that came with it. But before tackling the future, Mark had one major milestone ahead, taking Facebook public. In May 2012, Facebook held its initial public offering, or IPO. It was one of the most highly anticipated tech IPOs in history. Wall Street had its eyes on the company, eager to see how a social media platform could perform in the stock market. The process was intense. Financial documents had to be prepared, investors had to be convinced, and the company had to prove its value. When the day finally arrived, Mark wore his signature hoodie, walking into the stock exchange not like a traditional CEO, but like himself. Facebook was valued at over $100 billion, but the launch wasn't perfect. Technical glitches delayed trading, and the stock price struggled in the weeks that followed. Critics were quick to question whether Facebook could survive as a public company. Mark didn't panic. He focused on the product, the people, and the long-term vision. His goal wasn't short-term profit. It was building something that could last decades, and the team kept delivering. Facebook began making strategic acquisitions to stay ahead. In 2012, they purchased Instagram, a fast-growing photo-sharing app that was especially popular with younger users. Many questioned the $1 billion price tag. But Mark saw the future, mobile-first, visual communication. He promised to let Instagram remain independent while supporting its growth. That decision proved to be one of the smartest in Facebook's history. Instagram exploded in popularity and became a cultural force of its own. Then came another bold move. In 2014, Facebook acquired WhatsApp for $19 billion, one of the largest tech deals ever. WhatsApp had built a strong user base globally, especially in regions where SMS texting was expensive. Again, people wondered why Facebook would spend so much on a messaging app. But Mark understood that the future of communication was private, mobile, and fast. He wasn't just collecting platforms. He was building a network of services, each serving a different way people connected. And in the same year, Facebook acquired Oculus VR, stepping into the world of virtual reality. To many, this seemed like a strange direction. What did VR have to do with social networking? For Mark, it was about the future. He believed that one day we wouldn't just share photos and messages, we'd share full experiences. Virtual reality, he thought, could bring people together in new, immersive ways. These investments painted a clear picture. Facebook wasn't standing still. It was evolving, and with that evolution came new challenges. As the platform grew, so did concerns about misinformation, online bullying, and user privacy. Governments around the world began investigating how Facebook handled data. The company introduced new policies, transparency tools, and hired thousands of content moderators. Mark found himself testifying before U.S. Congress, answering hard questions about user data and political influence. For the first time, he wasn't just seen as a young innovator. He was a public figure held accountable for global consequences. It was a new kind of pressure, and the spotlight was harsh. But Mark responded by reshaping Facebook's priorities. He shifted focus toward meaningful interactions, reducing clickbait, and prioritizing posts from friends and family. He invested heavily in AI to detect harmful content, and he began speaking more publicly about ethics in tech. One of the key moments came with the Cambridge Analytica scandal. It was revealed that the personal data of millions of users had been improperly accessed and used for political advertising. The backlash was massive. Facebook faced lawsuits, fines, and a major drop in public trust. Mark took responsibility and vowed to do better. The company began auditing its systems, revising permissions, and building better data protection features. He knew it would take time to rebuild trust, but he was committed. And despite all the challenges, users kept using the platform, because Facebook was no longer just a website, it was infrastructure. A digital town square. A tool that people relied on for birthdays, reunions, job searches, and even crisis response. In the face of controversy, Facebook kept growing. New features like Facebook Live, Marketplace, and Groups deepened user engagement. Mark also pushed into emerging markets, bringing internet access to remote regions through initiatives like Internet.org. The mission was clear: connect the world, but connection came with complexity. Facebook had to balance freedom of speech with safety, global expansion with local laws, innovation with accountability. And Mark, now more mature, more seasoned, and still relentlessly focused, continued to navigate this evolving landscape. He had grown from a coder to a CEO, from a student with a side project to the leader of one of the most influential companies on Earth. And as the world changed, so did Facebook. But the core remained: connecting people. Even when the path was uncertain, Mark's vision was always looking forward. By the late 2010s, Mark Zuckerberg had become one of the most recognized figures in global technology. Not just for founding Facebook, but for shaping how billions of people connect, communicate, and share their lives. He was no longer just the CEO of a social network. He was a central player in discussions about the future of communication, data, democracy, and even reality itself. With Facebook continuing to expand and evolve, Mark began asking a bigger question: what comes after social media? He believed that the next major platform shift would be even more immersive, not on screens, but around and within them. In 2021, Mark made one of the most transformative moves in the company's history. He announced that Facebook Inc. would become Meta Platforms Inc. This wasn't just a rebranding, it was a signal. The company was going all in on building the metaverse, a shared digital space combining augmented reality, virtual reality, and real-time 3D interaction. For many, the announcement felt futuristic, even strange. But for Mark, it was the natural evolution of the internet. He envisioned a world where people could work, learn, play, and socialize in virtual environments, not just scroll through posts. His belief was that the metaverse could unlock new ways of creativity, collaboration, and presence. The name change to Meta reflected this shift in focus, but it also came during a time of increasing challenges. Facebook, now Meta, was facing intense scrutiny over its impact on mental health, misinformation, and political polarization. Former employees turned whistleblowers, revealing internal research that showed the platform's effect on teenage users and public discourse. Critics questioned whether Meta was innovating or escaping accountability. Mark responded with more transparency efforts, public interviews, and continued investment in safety tools. He emphasized that building new technology also meant building new guardrails, and he didn't stop investing in the future. Meta poured billions into developing VR hardware like Oculus Quest and software like Horizon Worlds, a virtual social space. Mark appeared in promotional demos, walking through digital rooms, shaking hands with avatars, and explaining his vision. It was a risky bet. The metaverse was still unproven, and public opinion was divided. But Mark had taken risks before. He knew that real innovation often looked uncertain at first. Meanwhile, Meta's family of apps, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger, continued to serve billions of users every day. The company introduced new features for creators, launched shopping tools, and improved messaging security. And yet, Mark's focus remained clear: building the next chapter of the internet. He hired teams of 3D artists, AI engineers, and VR designers. He funded global research centers to explore how digital presence could improve education, healthcare, and entertainment. To him, the metaverse wasn't just about technology, it was about potential. The potential to reduce distance, to increase empathy, to create new kinds of human experience. But the journey was not without criticism. Stockholders, journalists, and users questioned the company's priorities. Some worried that focusing too much on the metaverse meant losing sight of the problems in the present. Mark acknowledged these concerns but urged patience. He compared the metaverse to the early days of mobile internet, uncertain, but ultimately transformative. He knew it would take years, maybe a decade, to build. But he believed it was worth it. Because to him, technology wasn't just about convenience. It was about progress. And progress meant looking beyond what people needed today and imagining what they might need tomorrow. Even with all the debates, the lawsuits, and the pressure, Mark never stopped building. That drive, the same one that had powered him through late nights at Harvard, was still there. Now he was building not just software but digital worlds. Spaces that didn't yet exist but soon might. His journey had taken him from a teenage coder to the architect of a new digital frontier. And through it all, the core idea remained unchanged: connection. Connecting people, ideas, realities, across cities, cultures, and now, dimensions. Mark Zuckerberg may have started by trying to solve a simple problem in college, but his story had grown into a vision of what the future could look like. A future still unfolding, and one that continues to be written with every new update, every new project, every new line of code. From a dorm room to digital worlds, Mark Zuckerberg's journey is not just a tech story. It's a blueprint of how vision, persistence, and innovation can shape an entire generation. He didn't start with a plan to change the world. He started with a question: how can we connect better? And with each version of Facebook, with each new platform and bold experiment, that question continued to guide him. Along the way, he made mistakes. He faced criticism. He stood in courtrooms and conference halls answering for the immense power his company had accumulated. But he also kept showing up, to build, to learn, to evolve. Mark's story reminds us that the tools we use every day didn't appear by accident. They were imagined, engineered, tested, and sometimes even doubted. Behind every tap, every share, every message, there's a story of someone who kept going. Someone who didn't just react to the future, but decided to build it. So wherever you are on your journey, whether you're a student with an idea, an entrepreneur with a challenge, or simply someone curious about how things work, remember this: big changes often start small. And sometimes all it takes is a quiet moment, a blank screen, and a simple question to spark something extraordinary. Thank you for watching this story. If it inspired you, share it with someone who dreams big. And for more stories that bring language and life together, subscribe to Lang Fac and join us on this learning journey. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and never stop imagining what's possible.